Today we're going to be checking out the Router Mini. It's a brand new mesh Wi-Fi router from Starlink, and as you can see, this thing is absolutely tiny. Let me give you my phone here for comparison. It's about the same size as my phone, really, which is kind of amazing that they packed so much performance into this little thing, but we'll get into all that. This is a mesh Wi-Fi router, and the best part of it is that it's just $40. So $40 to help you increase the Wi-Fi coverage of your home. It's really what it's designed to do, is to tackle some of those dead zones. If you have used Wi-Fi for any amount of time in your home, then you know that these places are pretty common. Maybe it's a garage, maybe it's a corner room of your home. We all have those dead spots where our phones or other devices just don't want to connect or have a poor signal or poor performance. And something like this, a little extra mesh Wi-Fi router, can be added to in those areas to improve your coverage. Now, when most people think of dead zones and budget options, they think of something like this. This is, your stereotypical Wi-Fi booster, Wi-Fi extender. These simple devices have been pretty popular because they're affordable. They're in the $20 to $30 range on Amazon. You can get them everywhere. And what they do is they take your Wi-Fi signal from your router, they capture it, and then they repeat it on their own Wi-Fi network. But this comes with a lot of trade-offs. So it is cheap, but it's not mesh. It doesn't offer really good Wi-Fi performance, even though it does help boost the coverage. So in my opinion, the Router Mini from Starlink makes Wi-Fi extenders, Wi-Fi boosters obsolete. This little guy at just $40 means that nobody has an excuse to avoid proper wireless mesh networks. So let's take a look at what else comes in the kit. This is the Router Mini itself. We'll go into more detail on this in a second, but I just wanted to show you what else they include in the box. So you do get a power adapter. This is an AC wall adapter. It's got a little DC barrel plug on one end, and then obviously your AC wall outlet. It is rated at 9 volts, 1.6 amps, so not 12 volts, unfortunately, for those of you that are wanting to use this on a battery system like in your RV or van. But this will be great for people that are just using the Router Mini as a mesh node in their home. You also get this little metal stand here. So this is kind of nice. This does basically two things. So you can see right now the Router Mini is standing on its own, but it is rather thin and easy to tip over. But if you pop on this little stand on the bottom, it stands much better on a flat surface, but it's also got holes in the back that can be used to wall mount this to a variety of vertical surfaces. So they also include a little hardware kit that has some drywall anchors and some screws to make wall mounting this a lot easier. Moving on with the rest of the Router Mini and the features and everything, on the front you have the familiar Starlink logo. On the back you have another little Starlink SpaceX logo, and you'll notice a few ports. So you've got the DC port, that's the power input port that I was talking about before. It's rated for an input of the same thing, 9 volts, 1.6 amps. And you've got a couple of Ethernet ports. So the left one here, this is your WAN port. This is where you would plug in from your other Starlink router if you're doing wired mesh or using this as like a main router. This is your WAN port. On the right, we have the LAN Ethernet port, which is for connecting devices like a computer or even another wired mesh node, like if you're going to daisy chain multiple wired mesh nodes. And then you have a factory reset button on the back as well. And then on the bottom, you just have the little slot to install the stand. As far as specs go, this is a Wi-Fi 6 dual band router. Starlink says it can cover up to around 1,300 square feet. And it's compatible with older Starlink routers. So it's wired or wireless mesh compatible with both the Gen 3 router, which is the current full-size router, and then also the older Gen 2 Starlink router. It is not compatible with the Gen 1 Starlink router, if any of you guys out there are still using that old system, because Gen 1 isn't mesh compatible at all. Speaking of the other routers, let me just kind of give you another perspective of the size of this thing. So this is the Gen 3 router. This is the Gen 2 router. So as you can see, the Router Mini is just tiny, so it definitely lives up to its name. It's also compatible with the Starlink Mini's internal Wi-Fi router, wired or wireless mesh as well. So I think one of the reasons that they called it the Router Mini instead of the Mini Router, which I think sounds a lot better, I think they didn't want to confuse people and imply that this was only for the Starlink Mini dish, and that's not the case. Really is just another Starlink router, and it's completely compatible with any other Starlink system. In fact, I think most people who buy this are going to be residential home customers with one of the standard dishes and with those Gen 2 or Gen 3 routers, and they're going to pair it wirelessly just to increase their Wi-Fi coverage. So I think there's going to be some of you out there that might want to use this as a main router for your Starlink Mini system, like if you're installing it in a van or an RV or something like that. But I think a majority of people are going to be using this as a cheap, easy to deploy wireless mesh node. Another important thing to note about the Router Mini is that this has no PoE capability. It has no capability to power a Starlink dish. So with the other Starlink routers, like the Gen 3 router that I have here, it has an antenna port that you actually plug in the Starlink cable from your antenna. And what this Gen 3 router does is act as a PoE injector. So it sends power and data over the Starlink cable into your Starlink antenna. This Router Mini does not have that capability whatsoever. So it's just a router, it's just a mesh Wi-Fi router. So you can't use this to power your Starlink Mini if you're gonna use this as your main router or anything like that. So let me show you how easy this thing is to set up. There's basically 3 ways that you could use this Router Mini. You can use it in a wireless mesh configuration, you can use it as a wired mesh configuration, or you can wire it up to your existing Starlink router and use it as the main router, setting your other router in bypass mode. We're going to focus in this video on the first 2 options, wired and wireless mesh. Let me show you wired mesh first because that's the easiest, and it's actually the route that Starlink recommends. They recommend specifically with the Router Mini to hook it up via Ethernet if possible. That'll give you the best performance. Since this is only a dual band radio in here, it's not tri-band mesh like the full-size Gen 3 router. So the wireless performance in busy Wi-Fi environments is going to be reduced. That means less performance across your wireless backhaul between the Router Mini and your main router. So Starlink recommends wired mesh, but you don't have to, you can do wireless mesh. For wired mesh, all you really need is an Ethernet cable to hook up from your main router to the back of the Router Mini. So let me grab a cable here real quick. It doesn't have to be any kind of special cable or anything like that. All you really need to do is take one end of your cable, assuming this is your main Starlink router, take the cover off of the back, plug it into one of the Ethernet LAN ports on the back of your main Starlink router, run your Ethernet cable over to where you're going to be installing your Router Mini, and that could be in an area where you have poor Wi-Fi performance. And then you just plug it into the leftmost port here, that's your WAN port on the back of the Router Mini. Power up and it just pairs automatically. There's no pairing process at all. Once it detects that it's plugged into a main Starlink router, it's automatically in wired mesh access point mode, and that's all there is to it for a wired connection. Basically the same process if you're going to be doing this with the Starlink Mini dish. So if you have the Starlink Mini, what you can do, and actually instead of a regular Starlink cable, if you have the Starlink Mini, Starlink sells this. This is a 15 meter, around 50 feet, special cable, special Ethernet cable for the Starlink Mini. It has that special, let's see if I can grab it here, it has that special waterproof seal that maintains the environmental rating for the Starlink Mini antenna on that's going to be mounted on the exterior of your home. So you plug it into the Mini's Ethernet port on one end, and then it's just got a regular RJ45 that you plug in to the back of your Router Mini. Again, this supports wired mesh, so if you just plug it in like this, it'll automatically pair, or you can turn on bypass mode on the Starlink Mini to use this as your main router. You have to go through and set up the Wi-Fi name and password on the Router Mini. One really important note on using it with the Starlink Mini router is that this doesn't provide PoE, so you're still going to have to run the power cable to the Starlink Mini antenna alongside that Ethernet cable. I do have a product, a third-party product that I'm going to be reviewing pretty soon that basically is a PoE injector for the Starlink Mini dish. I'm still testing it out, still doing that review video, so stay tuned if you want to see that. But that will basically simplify the setup to where you only need one cable running to your Starlink Mini to provide both data and power. So that is wired mesh. Really simple stuff. That's, again, the most high performance way to do it. If you want the fastest wireless mesh or wired mesh speeds, that's the way to do it. You can also daisy chain additional router minis or even Gen 3 routers as wired mesh nodes. So the way that you daisy chain them, you just run another Ethernet connection off of the Ethernet LAN port off of the back of your router and go to another mesh node. You would plug into the WAN port of the other mesh node, and that would complete a daisy chain of Starlink mesh nodes. Now, importantly, Starlink says they only recommend having up to about 3 additional mesh nodes on your system. If you have too many, it can kind of overload the Starlink router. It doesn't know how to properly hand off all of those devices. And honestly, the way these cover, especially the Gen 3 router, unless you live in a 15,000 square foot house, you definitely don't need over 3 mesh units. All right, so let me show you how to do wireless mesh, because this is also really easy. And I think this is the route that most people will go because most people don't have Ethernet runs in their house. So for wireless mesh, what you want to do is find a location for your router mini. Starlink recommends putting the router mini about halfway in between your main router and the location that you're trying to improve your Wi-Fi signal. You don't want to put this in an area with a poor Wi-Fi signal because this is a Wi-Fi device after all. And if you're doing wireless mesh, if you put it in an area with poor signal, that means it's going to pick up poor signal from the main router and it's not going to do your devices any good. You're going to get really poor Wi-Fi speeds and performance out of that. So to deploy this, pick an area and plug in the power supply. It does have a status light, status LED on the bottom here that tells you that it's booting up. This does automatically shut off after a couple hours, just like with the Gen 3 router. After you power it on, wait a couple minutes, and what you're going to want to do is open up the Starlink app on your phone, and you should see a pair request. So I see it popped up right here. It just says new mesh node. A new mesh node is trying to join your network. You just hit the pair button, and it's going to go through a little tutorial here, kind of telling you about some of the things that I just mentioned about placement tips, placing it in the open. Starlink recommends on like a table or a shelf or a desk or something like that to keep it off the ground, and try to put it in an open area as well. They talk about wired or wireless. And then once you hit the pair button and it goes through that little tutorial, you're gonna have to wait a few minutes as it's connecting. And I just noticed, actually looking at the back of the Starlink router mini as it's powered on, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the LED on the front here, it actually illuminates the Ethernet ports on the back. So that's pretty cool. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but that does add a cool little element to it. It's been a couple minutes, still has not connected. Oh, there we go. So you can see I've got a solid line there. If I go back to the main page here, you can see now in my little network diagram, I have a wireless mesh node paired to my main router. So that's all there is to it. You now have a wireless mesh system set up. And if you ever need to manage or remove mesh nodes or anything like that, go back into your Starlink app, go to network, go to the nodes tab, and you can see all of your devices. If you accidentally blocked a request to pair, you'll also find that in this list here. So if you block it initially, don't worry, you can go back and pair it later. So now we're at the point of the video where I want to test the Wi-Fi performance of this new router mini to let you know what the actual coverage is. Starlink says it can cover around 1,300 square feet. So we're going to put that to the test. I'm going to be doing some Wi-Fi and internet speed tests of the router mini. Now I thought about all the different ways that I could do this and test this for you. And I think the best way would be to just use this as a main router in my own home and just push the limits of it, see what kind of Wi-Fi range and speeds we can get out of the Mini. Because when it's in a wireless or wired mesh configuration, you still have the main Gen 3 router that I have behind me that is still producing some Wi-Fi signal and still covering some devices. So rather than test it as a wireless mesh node and introducing more variables into the equation, I'm gonna actually put my Gen 3 router that's actually on the shelf behind me, that's my main router for my home, I'm actually gonna put it into bypass mode. So if I go into the Starlink app, go into settings, go into the router and click on bypass mode and slide to turn on bypass mode, What that's gonna do is turn off the Wi-Fi, turn off the routing functions of the Gen 3 router that I have behind me. And now what I can do is hook up the router Mini. So I've actually got another one. It's actually been running here. I've been testing it basically all weekend long, this past weekend, using it as my main router. So I have an Ethernet cord going into the WAN port on the back of the router Mini. I've got the power input, and I've got the cable plugged into the LAN port on the back of the Gen 3 router. So now that the Gen 3 router is in bypass mode, this is gonna take over. So this is broadcasting my wireless network for my entire home. I don't have any other Starlink routers, wired or wireless mesh, just this powering my entire home. So my home is about 2,000 square feet or so. It's 3 levels. I'm in the basement right now, and I've got a main floor and an upper floor. This is probably in the worst location that I could possibly put it in my home, being at the lower level in the corner of a basement. So we're really gonna put this to the test. I'm gonna be testing out that claim of 1,300 square feet of coverage. Been a couple minutes, it's booted up. You can see what it looks like. It looks kind of funny having the router Mini acting as the main router for this massive, Starlink standard Gen 3 dish. But we are here, we're connected to the Wi-Fi network. Let's run a quick internet speed test as I'm right next to the router, just to get a baseline of what my internet performance is of my main unit. So if I go into speed test, it's important to note that Starlink has actually changed the layout of the speed test a little bit. So by default, now it runs an internet speed test directly from the Starlink antenna to the Starlink satellites, the Starlink network. So there's no Wi-Fi variable there when you're just running this default test. To get to a Wi-Fi test, to test the internet speed of your phone, you have to go hit the advanced tab and then go iPhone to internet. So when I do that, I can click start, and we'll just see what kind of performance we get as a baseline for the rest of the testing that I'm going to be doing throughout my house. And as you can see, we're jumped up over 400 megabits per second, which Starlink speeds, by the way, have been incredible recently. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but I've been getting routinely over 400 megabits per second. My upload speed is still around that 20 to 30 megabits per second range, and then 19 milliseconds latency. So final result here, 425 megabits per second down, 24 up, and 19 milliseconds of latency. Really good stuff there. So now let's go to some other areas of my home, test this out. I think we're gonna be covered here in the basement area. Not a very big area as far as horizontal distance away from the router. But let me go up to my living room where I have my TV and I'm often using devices, and we'll check the speeds up there. All right, so I'm in my living room now, and this is an area where I've got a TV and we often sit on the couch using our devices. And so I want to test the Wi-Fi performance up here from the router Mini. The router Mini is actually pretty much directly below me in the basement, so not too far away physically, but it does have the floor in between, obviously. So if I go into the Starlink app, they give you some really cool tools to be able to analyze your Wi-Fi signal and performance. So if you go into network, find your phone in the list of devices here. So if I click on iPhone, I get some cool connection stats. So I can see signal strength, and this is a really good indicator of your Wi-Fi signal strength. So anywhere from in the range of like negative 30 dBm to like negative 70 dBm, that's a solid Wi-Fi signal. And I'm here at negative 60, negative 55 dBm, which is a really solid connection. Still getting really good throughput speeds. Anywhere in the range of like negative 70 to negative 80 dBm you're gonna be running into some issues, maybe some performance drop, maybe some reliability issues. And then anything in the range of like negative 80 to negative 90, it's gonna be extremely unreliable as far as your Wi-Fi connection. You're gonna be dropping a signal. So it's really nice that Starlink gives us this option to check out our Wi-Fi performance. So with that said, let me run a Wi-Fi speed test. And this time I'm gonna run the iPhone to router. So iPhone to router tests the wireless speed from your phone down to the Starlink router. That gives you a good idea of like the theoretical performance, like if you're transferring a large file from your phone to like a network attached storage, something like that. This is not internet speed, this is just the Wi-Fi speed. So I'm still getting a great signal here, 640 megabits per second down, and then right around 300 or so megabits per second on the upload. And if I go to run an internet speed test at this location, you can see I'm still getting over 300, 280, 290, yeah, over 300 megabits per second. So still full internet speeds from this location. This was still a perfect Wi-Fi signal. All my devices are going to be happy at this location. So I moved a little bit and I'm now at basically the furthest point horizontally away from where I can get on my main level from the Starlink router mini that's in the basement. So this is a good test as far as distance away from the router. And if I go back into these network settings and do the same thing, click on my device, look at the connection stats, I can see that my signal is still within the decent range of a Wi-Fi. So I'm hitting negative 79 dBm right now. So right on the edge there of between a solid Wi-Fi signal and something that's going to cause me problems. And let's do a quick test here. Speed test. Let's start with the Wi-Fi test this time. iPhone to router. So you can see that the speeds have significantly come down. So I'm hitting around 180, 190 megabits per second. So about a third of what I got just standing, 30 feet away in my living room. And if I go back and run an internet speed test, what that basically means is that I'm bottlenecked by my Wi-Fi connection. I can no longer get those 400 megabits per second because my Wi-Fi signal is lower. But this is still a respectable number. I'm still getting 200 megabits per second, and it looks like the upload, well, it struggled initially, but I'm still getting 200 megabits per second down and 19 megabits per second up, which is still a completely usable Wi-Fi signal, still great speeds, even though I am bottlenecked by my signal a little bit. So now I'm really stress testing the router mini. So I'm at the top floor of my house. This is the second story, and I'm in the corner bedroom. It's like a spare bedroom / office. And this is horizontally the furthest away I can get from the router mini, and it's also vertically the furthest away. So the farthest corner of my house, this is the worst case scenario for the router mini. And it shows on the Starlink app here, you can see my signal strength is at negative 87 dBm, which is awful. I'm surprised I'm not disconnecting, honestly. But let's see what we can do because we still are connected. Let's see what this does to our internet and Wi-Fi speeds. So if you come to speed test, go to advanced, let's do iPhone to router. And yeah, these have dropped way down. So less than 100 megabits per second on the Wi-Fi transfer speeds, which means the internet speed test is probably going to be somewhere around the same. And yeah, so we are at basically half of what we were down on the main floor in the dining room area, and about a third, even a fourth of what we were much closer to the router in the basement. But the bigger takeaway here is not that the signal drops off. The bigger takeaway is that in my nearly 2,000 square foot house, the router mini is still able to deliver, even at the furthest distance away that I can get from my router, 109 megabits per second down, 24 up at 21 milliseconds of latency, when it's only supposed to be able to cover 1,300 square feet. So what that tells me is that the router mini is going to be an incredible wireless mesh node for any of you out there that are using that to just extend your existing Wi-Fi network. The way that I'm doing it in this video for this review is not the way that you're supposed to. I'm just doing it to stress test it and really find out the range and coverage that it can provide. And I can say from this testing and using it all weekend as my main router that it's perfectly capable of covering 1,000 to 1,500 square feet of space. That's plenty to be able to add coverage into dead zones, areas where you don't have great Wi-Fi coverage or great Wi-Fi speeds. So there you have it. The Router Mini is a $40 mesh Wi-Fi router that could easily add Wi-Fi coverage in your home into those dead zones. And even as a main router, this thing is pretty capable. This thing definitely surprised me, especially considering the size. At basically the size of a cell phone, this thing packs a pretty big punch. Now I know one of the questions that you all are gonna have are, okay, should I get the Router Mini or the Gen 3 router if I'm looking to expand my Wi-Fi coverage? So the Gen 3 router actually is now just $80 in the Starlink shop. So $80 for the Gen 3, $40 for the Router Mini. Which one do you pick? I really think it comes down to the size of your home, what kind of area you're trying to cover, and how many users are on your network, how many devices are on your network at the same time. So the Gen 3 router is definitely better. Worth twice the cost? Yes, I think so for most applications. So this is gonna cover, Starlink says at least, nearly triple the area that the Router Mini can cover. This is like 3,200 square feet of coverage versus 1,300 for the Router Mini. And it's because it just has better radios, better antennas, and also keep in mind this is a tri-band mesh, whereas this is only dual band. So if you have another Gen 3 mesh router in your system, this is going to talk to it at much higher speeds than the Router Mini can. That makes this best for larger homes, for covering larger areas, and also for homes with a lot more devices. So if you have a bigger family, 4 or 5 people in your household, I would definitely go spend the extra money and get the Gen 3 router. This Router Mini, however, is great for just about everything else. Like, for example, I have a detached garage that I have trouble getting a Wi-Fi signal to. I also have in the upstairs, even the Gen 3 router that I'm using as my main router behind me, it kind of struggles to get a signal up there sometimes. This is going to be perfect for just adding small bits of coverage here and there in some of those dead zones. And at $40, it's just an incredible value. If you don't need to cover a lot, if you don't have a ton of devices and users in your home, the Router Mini is going to be a great affordable option. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, it makes those Wi-Fi extenders, those Wi-Fi boosters that everybody used to buy, it makes those completely obsolete. Just get this, that way you have a proper mesh network. You have a seamless experience for all of your devices when you're walking throughout your home. You don't have to worry about connecting to different networks or performance losses or anything like that. Just get the Router Mini. It's pretty amazing, as you could tell by my demonstration today. And it wouldn't be a review if I didn't talk about at least one of the downsides of the Router Mini. And I think really considering the price, factoring that into the equation, there really is only one downside to the Router Mini. And that is the same downside to all Starlink routers, is that they just lack any kind of advanced networking features. So you don't have advanced parental controls, you don't have firewall rules, you don't have port forwarding, anything like that. If you're an advanced Wi-Fi user, if you have some additional use cases for your Wi-Fi configuration, Starlink routers are not going to be for you. And that includes even their mesh nodes. So you'll want to go with a third-party option that has better configurations for your network. The Starlink routers, however, are perfect for the vast majority of people that just need, basic Wi-Fi access. And I think if you're in that camp, then stick with the Starlink routers. They're super easy to set up and integrate into your existing network, as I've shown in this video. That would be, I think, one of the only downsides of the Router Mini that I can tell. So I'd love to hear from you now. If you have any questions about the Router Mini or the Gen 3 router or mesh or anything like that, let me know in the comments below. I'll try to help you out. Always appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next video.